All right, so we're diving into something pretty cool today. It's called behavioral engineering, and we're going to be looking at this article from Unicorn's Ecosystem. It's called EP38, The Rise of the Behavioral Engineer, How Data Fuels Evolution. It just came out like a couple days ago on December 19th, and you know how like most digital transformations, they fizzle out, they don't really work. Well, this article is saying that this behavioral engineering thing might be the key to actually making them work.
Yeah, so the author, Mikhail Bressoni, is pointing out that, a lot of these big change initiatives, they don't really deliver on their promises. And a lot of times it's because they lack a scientific, data-driven foundation. Mm-hmm. They're relying on assumptions and wishful thinking. And it's kind of like the Peter Rossi's iron law of evaluation.
Yeah.
Good intentions alone don't guarantee success.
Right. So what is this behavioral engineering thing? Is it like some kind of mind control or something?
Not quite. It's more about understanding how the environment shapes behavior within an organization. So think of it as applying a scientific method to drive change. So it's a modern take on Rossi's idea of a social engineer.
Okay, that makes sense. The article describes the typical company as being in a state of like organizational chaos, where teams are just putting out fires constantly and working on misaligned priorities. I feel like a lot of us have probably experienced that firsthand.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredibly common. And it leads to burnout, inefficiency, and ultimately failed transformations. And the author argues that it's not necessarily due to a lack of talent or skill, but the problem often lies in the environment itself. And even Carl G. Jung's psychological theories emphasize this, the crucial role of environment in shaping behavior.
Interesting. So instead of trying to change people directly, you change the system around them.
Precisely. And that's where this behavioral engineer comes in. They act like a data-driven architect of change, using observation, experimentation, and what the article calls a socio-technical redesign to nudge people towards more effective ways of working.
That socio-technical redesign bit sounds kind of complicated. Can you maybe break that down a little more?
Sure. So it was about recognizing that.
Okay.
Technology and social structures need to work together. So, for example, imagine a company is introducing a new collaboration platform to try to improve communication. The technical side is implementing the platform itself, but the social side is designing processes to ensure that people actually use it effectively. You need both for it to be successful.
Ah, got it. So how does this behavioral engineer actually go about making change happen?
Well, the article outlines 3 key pillars of behavioral engineering, and it starts with observation and assessment. So that's gathering data to understand the current state of the organization. So think of it like an organizational scientist, carefully observing social interactions, communication patterns, and the discrepancies between the intended outcomes and what's really happening. And they're using objective data to get a clear, unbiased picture.
And then I'm guessing they actually try to change things.
Yeah, the second pillar is hypothesis and experimentation. So the behavioral engineer designs targeted experiments based on their observations. And this could involve anything from reducing unnecessary meetings to introducing pair programming. It all depends on the specific challenges they've identified.
So they come up with a hypothesis like, if we reduce meetings, people will have more focus time. And then they test it out.
Exactly. They don't just assume a solution will work. They gather evidence to support it.
And what's that third pillar?
Data-driven feedback loops. It's about continuously measuring outcomes, analyzing the data, and refining their approach based on what they learn. And the article mentions something called dojos, which are dedicated spaces where teams can experiment with new behaviors in a safe environment.
Like a training ground for change.
Exactly. Think of it like a flight simulator for organizational change. Teams can test out different behavioral prompts, those little nudges that encourage specific actions, and see how they impact their work. It's all about minimizing disruption and maximizing the chances of success when those changes are implemented more broadly.
Okay, so they observe, they experiment, and they constantly adjust based on the data. That makes sense. But how does this actually work in practice? Does the article give any, examples?
Yeah, it features a really interesting case study from episode 37 about a struggling operations team that was just overwhelmed by chaos, but was able to completely turn things around using this behavioral engineering approach.
Tell me more about that. What specifically did they do?
Well, they started by observing that the team was constantly bombarded with meetings, which left them with only 2 hours of focused work time per day. No wonder they felt stressed and unproductive.
Only 2 hours. Oof. I bet a lot of people can relate to that. What did they do to change that?
Well, they implemented a variety of experiments, like using the Pomodoro technique to help the team manage their focus. and establishing a team, social contract, to set clear expectations for behavior. They even created a visual workload board to kind of shield the team from distractions and create more transparency.
So it wasn't just one big change, but a series of smaller, targeted experiments.
That's right. And by constantly monitoring the data and refining their approach, they were able to significantly increase the team's focus time.
Okay, but increasing focus time is one thing. Did it actually improve the team's work overall?
Absolutely. They went from constantly putting out fires to proactively developing solutions. And get this, they ended up building this incredible internal developer platform that not only eliminated system outages, but also added real value for developers. It's amazing what happens when you create the conditions for people to do their best work.
So instead of a one-time transformation, it sounds more like an ongoing process of evolution.
Exactly. It's about embracing a data-driven, iterative approach to change, one that recognizes the power of the environment in shaping behavior and driving sustainable improvements.
So you're telling me we shouldn't just try to fix people, but rather fix the system they work in. That's a pretty interesting idea. What else did this article cover?
Well, it also delves into how this team shifted their mindset from a reactive operations focus to a more proactive product mindset. And they began using domain-driven design and user acceptance tests, by example, to ensure that their work was closely aligned with user needs and they were getting constant feedback.
That seems like a pretty big shift. I wonder if they had any resistance to all these changes. And I'm curious to learn more about these dojos and how they work in practice.
Let's talk about that in our next part. We'll dive deeper into the practical applications of behavioral engineering and how you can start applying these concepts in your own work.
Sounds good. So before we were talking about how this operations team was able to turn things around using this behavioral engineering approach. It's fascinating how they shifted from just like firefighting all the time to actually building like valuable products. But I'm curious, like, was there any resistance to all these changes?
Yeah, the article doesn't mention specific pushback, but it is important to remember that, any change can be met with resistance, especially when it comes to, established ways of working.
Right. People can be pretty attached to their routines, even if those routines aren't really working.
Exactly. And that's where those dojos we mentioned earlier can really come in. They provide a safe space for teams to experiment with new behaviors and get comfortable with them before rolling them out more broadly.
So how do these dojos actually work in practice? Is it like a physical space where people go?
It can be a physical space, but it's more of a concept, a dedicated time and framework for experimentation. The article mentions that Unicorn's ecosystem has different types of dojos, from software craftsmanship dojos to product dojos and even leadership dojos.
So it's like a tailored learning environment.
Yeah.
Where you can try out new techniques and behaviors.
Exactly. Imagine a team struggling with communication. They can use a dojo to practice active listening techniques, experiment with different meeting formats, or even try out new collaboration tools, all in a safe environment where mistakes are seen as learning opportunities.
That's a really interesting concept. It's like a sandbox for organizational change, where you can play around and see what works without the pressure of real-world consequences.
It's about creating a culture of experimentation and continuous improvement, where failure is seen as a stepping stone to success. And by testing things out in a dojo setting, teams can gather valuable data and refine their approach before implementing changes more widely.
That makes a lot of sense. That reminds me of the lean startup methodology, where you like test your assumptions and iterate quickly based on feedback.
Yeah, it's a similar idea applied to organizational change. And this data-driven approach is really at the heart of behavioral engineering. It's not about relying on intuition or gut feeling, but about gathering evidence to support decisions.
Earlier, you mentioned socio-technical redesign as a key pillar of behavioral engineering. Can you give me like a real-world example of how that might work?
Sure. Let's say a company is trying to improve knowledge sharing amongst its employees. They might implement a new knowledge management platform. That's the technical side. But if they don't also create social structures and norms that encourage people to actually use the platform, it's likely to fail.
So they might need to introduce new processes, like regular knowledge sharing sessions, or even incentivize contributions to the platform.
Exactly. The socio part of the equation is just as important as the technical part. It's about understanding how people interact with technology and designing systems that support the desired behaviors.
Okay. I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together, but how does this go beyond just specific teams or projects? Can behavioral engineering be applied at a larger scale?
Absolutely. Remember how the article talks about most digital transformations failing? That's because they often rely on top-down mandates and sweeping changes that don't account for the human element. Behavioral engineering offers a more nuanced and sustainable approach.
So instead of trying to force change on people, you create an environment where those changes are more likely to occur naturally.
Precisely. You shift from a mindset of fixing people to fixing the system.
That's a powerful idea. It's not about telling people what to do, but about creating the conditions for them to make better choices. It sounds like behavioral engineering could be a really valuable tool for any organization, large or small.
And you know, the article ends with this really thought-provoking question. Are you ready to start evolving? And it challenges us to embrace this evolutionary mindset, not just in the context of digital transformation, but in all aspects of our work and lives.
Yeah, that question really resonates with me. It's a reminder that change is constant and that we need to be adaptable and proactive in shaping the environments we work in.
Yeah, instead of simply going through the motions, what if we started paying closer attention to our work environments?
Yeah.
Noticing those patterns of behavior, those unspoken rules, those little frustrations that sap our energy and creativity.
And then what if we use the principles of behavioral engineering to experiment with different approaches, those small nudges that could lead to bigger, more positive outcomes? It's an empowering thought, isn't it? It means that we don't have to be passive bystanders. We can be active participants in shaping our own evolution, both individually and collectively.
I'd love to dive deeper into how we can actually apply these concepts to our everyday work lives. But before we do, I think it would be helpful to revisit that case study with the struggling operations team we talked about, their improved focus time and how they created a valuable internal platform.
Yeah.
But I'd love to understand, why their approach was so successful.
You're right. Let's go back to that. What specifically about their approach led to such dramatic results? Was it just the Pomodoro technique and the social contract? Or were there other factors at play? Exactly. And what can we learn from their success?
Okay, so we're back. And I want to kind of dig into that case study a little more. With that operations team, we talked about some of the changes they made, like that Pomodoro technique and the team social contract. But what was really interesting to me was how they shifted from a reactive mindset to a more proactive one. They went from constantly putting out fires to actually building something really valuable. How did that happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. It wasn't just about implementing a few techniques. It was really about a fundamental change in their way of thinking and working. Remember how they were initially just bogged down with endless meetings and struggling to find any focused work time. That kind of environment just breeds reactivity. You're constantly responding to urgent demands, and you never really have the space to step back and think strategically.
Right, you're always stuck in that fight or flight mode.
Right.
Exactly. But by intentionally creating space for focused work, the team was able to shift their attention to more proactive long-term thinking. The Pomodoro technique, for example, helped them break down their work into manageable chunks and minimize distractions.
Okay, that makes sense, but
the
Pomodoro technique is just a time management tool. How did that lead to such a profound shift in their mindset?
Yeah, it's not just about the technique itself, it's about what it enabled. So by creating those pockets of focused time, the team was able to engage in deeper thinking and problem solving. They were able to step out of the weeds and start looking at the bigger picture.
So by reducing distractions and creating that focused time, they were able to tap into a different part of their brain, like the part that's responsible for strategic thinking and innovation.
Exactly. And the team social contract also played a crucial role here. By explicitly defining their values and expectations for how they would work together, they created a sense of shared responsibility and accountability.
Yeah, I can see how that would create a more supportive and collaborative environment, which is essential for innovation.
Exactly. It's not just about individual effort. It's about creating a team culture.
Yeah.
That fosters creativity and encourages people to take risks.
The article also mentioned that they started using domain-driven design and user acceptance tests by example. How did that contribute to their success?
Yeah, that was another key piece of the puzzle. By adopting those approaches, they shifted their focus from just completing tasks to truly understanding user needs and delivering value.
So it's like a combination of factors that all work together to create this incredible transformation.
Absolutely. The techniques, the social contract, the focus on user needs. It was a holistic approach that addressed both the technical and social aspects of their work.
Yeah, it really highlights how behavioral engineering isn't just about implementing a few quick fixes. It's about creating a sustainable system for change.
Yeah, it's about understanding the interconnectedness of behavior, environment, and technology.
So what's the biggest takeaway from this case study? What can our listeners learn from this team's success?
I think the most important lesson is that small, intentional changes can have a ripple effect, leading to much larger and more significant outcomes.
It's not about grand sweeping transformations, but about those incremental steps, those tiny nudges that, when compounded over time, can completely transform the way we work.
It's about embracing a mindset of continuous improvement, experimentation, and data-driven decision-making.
It's about being the architects
Of our own evolution.
Exactly. And anyone can start applying these principles, whether you're leading a team, working on a project, or simply looking to improve your own productivity and well-being.
So as Mikhail Bressoni asks in the article, are you ready to start evolving?
Yeah, I hope this deep dive has given you some new tools and insights to help you on that journey. Remember, even small changes can have a big impact. Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into behavioral engineering. It's been a fascinating exploration. And I'm definitely feeling inspired to start applying some of these principles in my own work.
It's been a pleasure unpacking this with you. Remember, it's all about continuous learning and evolution, both for individuals and organizations.
That's right. Until next time, keep experimenting, keep learning,
and keep evolving.
Thanks for listening, and please remember to subscribe to the Forge of Unicorns to stay up to date with our latest episodes.